Welcome to the How Good Innovation Series. My name is Leah Wolf. I'm currently in Brooklyn, New York, and I'm the head of regenerative education and content here at How Good. I am so excited to be speaking with our two panelists today. We have Jenn Yates, who is the director of the True Cost Accounting Accelerator, and Patrick Holden, who is the founding director of the Sustainable Food Trust. And we are going to be discussing true cost accounting in the food industry. I'm also really looking forward to our upcoming sessions, so I'd like to draw your attention to those as well so that you can jot them down into your calendars. On April 6th, I'm excited to talk about double materiality with the head of GRI North America, Matthew Rusk, and Sarah Rowland, who is the ESG Advisory Services Leader for Antia Group. And on April 25th, we'll be joined by Amar James, who is a Deputy Portfolio Manager at Van Eck, and Dan Altschuler, who is the managing partner at Unovis Asset Management. So I hope that you can join us for one or both of our upcoming sessions. You can sign up for them and for all Innovation Series sessions on our website at howgood.com/innovation-series. With that, I am going to throw it over to our esteemed panelists to introduce themselves. Jenn, if you'd like to tell us just a little bit about yourself, your sustainability journey, and the work that you do at your organization.
Great. Thank you so much, Leah, and thank you to How Good for inviting me to be here today. My name is Jenn Yates. I'm the director of the True Cost Accounting Accelerator. The True Cost Accounting Accelerator is a network of organizations from across different sectors, including industry, nonprofit or civil society, academia, philanthropy, policy leaders, and others who have really come together around this idea that the externalized costs that are inherent in our current food system are creating too much damage to human health and the environment, and that business and policy leaders could be making better decisions if we had better insight into these hidden costs and to the hidden benefits that are sometimes not as well valued by decision makers. So with this coalition of organizations behind us, we come together through a number of different activities and meetings and events around the globe, really, to elevate and increase awareness of true cost accounting, to build understanding of the approaches to true cost accounting that can unlock better decision making, and to really drive further coherence and unity in the field so that we can have more cohesive approaches. So with that, we are currently, a relatively small team on the sort of secretariat side, but with a really vast network of organizations and individuals and stakeholders that are represented by all of our participants. But really looking for partners and people who are aligned in this journey with us to join with us in these efforts. My own personal background, and just a snapshot, I'm based in Washington, D.C. I've been working on food systems and sustainability and health and diet and nutrition issues for over 20 years in a number of roles. Started out with a group called the Union of Concerned Scientists, really looking at, at the time, not using the term hidden costs or externalities, but really looking at how we could drive better policies and investments in approaches to the food system that would yield better benefits for human health and the environment at the U.S. national level. Have also spent some time working specifically around the issue of school meals as a really important entry point for changing food systems and for really building lifelong benefits for children and their future outcomes, their health, educational, and well-being that could be influenced heavily by improving school meal programs at the earliest of ages. So all of these have kind of come together. I actually met Patrick years ago for the first time. We were together on a panel where I was talking about the improved taxpayer savings we could see if Americans ate according to dietary guidelines. Patrick was talking about farming practices and sustainability, and the panel was called True Cost Accounting. And at the time, it was really the first time I had heard that term, and that was in 2015. So here we are, the True Cost Accounting Accelerator launched formally in 2020, was driven through a collaborative process led by a number of groups, including Patrick, who really was the sort of trailblazer on this concept. And so I will turn it over to him and really look forward to hearing his remarks on the intersection of true cost accounting and its potential for driving food system innovation and decision making. Patrick?
Hello, everyone. Great to hear your introductory remarks, Jen. I'm Patrick Holden. I'm sitting in my car in London, just by Hyde Park. Apologies for the very poor backdrop. I am actually a Londoner, although as a hippie, I got back to the land in 1973, exactly 50 years ago. We're celebrating 50 years on the same farm that we arrived at June 1973 to set up a dairy operation. Soon after we got there, we realized that we were selling milk to the nationalized co-op at the time, it's called the Milk Marketing Board, and all dairy farmers got the same price. And we couldn't work it out why we were farming organically from day one. So we didn't use any chemicals, and we were farming in harmony with nature and all the kind of things that, is associated with sustainable agriculture. But we found we needed a higher price for our milk to make sense of it economically. So this went on for a few years. And then I got involved with an organization called the Soil Association. And we decided that we needed to create a separate standard for producing milk in a sustainable way. And that was the origin of the development of the organic market. And actually, the motive for the development of the organic market was trying to create a place where we could get a premium price to cover what we now would see as the beneficial public outcomes of farming in a more sustainable way. And that went on, well, it's gone on until today, really, that we've now got globally a market for organic products and other brands of sustainability, all of which I think are treating the symptom, not the cause, of an agriculture and a food system where the true costs, damage to the planet, to nature, and to human society of industrial production hasn't been factored into the price we pay for our food. And I work with the Soil Association for many years, setting up the organic standards and developing the organic market. But then I left in 2010 because I thought, actually, we certified organic today. We're the longest organic certified dairy farm in Wales, and we produce a reassuringly expensive cheese, if you see what I mean. But actually, we realized that unless all farmers undergo an agricultural transition and farm in a sustainable way, we're not going to have a livable planet. We're going to destroy nature, and we're going to have a sick society, literally physically as well as mentally sick, because the food that we're all eating today isn't very good for us. And yet it's so cheap. So I got involved with this, what has become the true cost accounting movement, realized that hidden costs and food systems externalities were really an important issue to grasp. Charles, he gave a speech in Washington, D.C., I think it was in 2011, which was called The Future of Food, in which he referred to perverse incentives, the wrong misdirected subsidies, and all that kind of stuff in London in 2013 on true cost accounting and the hidden costs of food. And then we did another big one in San Francisco in 2015. We had another one in Kentucky as well. And this whole work now has been embraced by organizations and individuals all over the world. And yet, if we look today at, if you get a basket of food, let's say it costs £1, it wouldn't cost £1 anymore. For every pound you spend on cheap supermarket food, our hidden costs of UK food report, published in 2017 and upgraded in 2019, available to download from our website, indicates that the price we pay for our food is less than 50% of its true cost. If you factor in climate change, damage to nature, destruction of soil, and damage to human health, and it's split, probably the extra pound that we ought to be paying for our food is probably a split 50-50 between damage to natural capital and the environment and damage to human health. And the Rockefeller Foundation did an upgrade study, I think it was last year, where they said, no, it's not half the price is actually a third of the price. So I think fascinating situation where there's hardly a farmer or a food company in the world that doesn't agree that we need to undergo an agricultural transition. I'm talking Mars, Nestle, all the big food giants, the Cargills. If you speak to them at chief executive level, which I've had the privilege of doing, they all say we have to go through an agricultural transition, just like the energy. Discussion is absolutely a discussion which is needed today. And that's why we've been working over the last more than 5 years now on developing what we are calling a global farm metric. We first need to measure the impacts and then we monetize afterwards.
Thanks very much, Patrick. I think we're having a bit of a connectivity issue, but I'm hoping that it will stabilize. And if it worsens, we'll try to find another solution. I am hoping that we can talk a little bit. I think that you've done an excellent job of laying a foundation for us to understand true cost accounting as a framework, and the urgency with which brands and food producers need to adopt this sort of framework and way of thinking. I wonder if you could talk a bit about the ways that companies might see this as a tool, not only as a tool to potentially make a reputational tool to let consumers know that this company is a brand that cares about the environment, that cares about the true cost of their production, but also make a bit of a business case, because I think that that's something that's still one of the largest obstacles when it comes to convincing companies and food producers to truly account for the externalized cost of their goods. So Patrick, if you want to take that one to start, and then Jen, if you have anything to add or examples from the companies that you work with of how it's being done successfully.
Yeah, I think there's like an outcome, if you know what I mean, where everybody is paying an honest price for their food. And if that was the case, then the difference between conventionally produced food, which is causing harm, no fault of the farmers, and sustainably produced food would narrow. Maybe it would reverse. So that would be really good. So I think we have two things here. We need a transition strategy on getting the right carrots and sticks in place. And meanwhile, we need to encourage producers, consumers, to buy the right kind of food with a better labeling system. And I think the better labeling system can be based on true cost accounting, first of all, by measuring the impacts and then having some sort of label which reflects the damage done or the positive attributes. And I think we can all work towards that. And of course, How Good are already working in this space.
And Jen, do you have examples of some organizations that are doing this well?
Well, I think what's important to understand is that a lot of organizations are already doing something that, if you kind of pieced it together, might look very much like a true cost accounting exercise. I think companies are seeing the vulnerabilities to their supply chains, the vulnerabilities to their business models, and those risks are coming from a number of different directions. They're coming from climate change, they're coming from biodiversity loss, they're coming from the health and well-being of their workers and their livelihoods being at stake, from conflict that is happening around the world. And so I think there's a number of ways that companies are already trying to look beyond just their balance sheets of the sort of strict financial measurements we have in place today, to see how they can reduce those risks and come up with a more, many businesses are sort of advancing this type of work because they have a values-driven business model that really does kind of want to do the right thing from an ethical or a values-driven perspective. Others maybe need a little bit more of a dollars and cents reason to take this step, but many are doing it for that exact reason. I know there's been, at least here in the US, a lot of noise lately about woke investing and ESG being some kind of posturing toward a certain segment of stakeholders. But in fact, there's been a lot of research showing that companies that do really invest heavily in ESG as a model or other types of impact assessment are seeing more sustainable and profitable business models as a result. So in terms of examples, of TCA in practice specifically, we've been one of our partners is a group called the Capitals Coalition. They've been doing an implementation, a series of pilots in, I believe, 7 countries around the world, working with business leaders. And what true cost accounting stands apart from existing approaches like ESG and others is a few things. One is that it is a multi-capitals approach where you look not just at narrowly at natural resource impacts or human health impacts or economic impacts. It's built on 4 pillars: natural, human, social, and economic capital, and looking at whether certain activities that the business could be directly involved in either increase or deplete capital on across those 4 different areas. And there are well-developed frameworks for doing this, but the implementation is really context specific and relies, pretty extensively on what kind of question it is you're trying to answer for your business. So we do have, if you go to the Capitals Coalition website, you'll find a number of case studies. A lot of these are still in progress. It's a very new and dynamic field. I think Patrick and his colleagues could talk about some of their work they're doing with farmers on they've developed a tool for farmers to be able to do on-field assessments of their impacts across these different areas. The other thing that really sets true cost accounting apart is that it really integrates both quantitative and qualitative approaches, where you can look, a lot of the things that we are talking about looking at can't be translated into dollars and cents. We're talking about some concepts that are, ethically oriented or maybe have sort of a difficulty assigning a price. But we have to try to do a measurement and to do a baseline assessment so we can really measure success and have a reference point. So true cost accounting kind of provides that framework. It encourages, whether it's companies or policymakers doing the assessment, to not obscure the negative impacts. They really want, it encourages an honest assessment and transparency. And so another reason why companies are starting to look at doing true cost accounting in projects like the one that my colleague just pasted into the chat with the Capitals Coalition is that it encourages greater trust and the reputation of the companies, who often find that some of the current models like ESG or others are not always trusted by external stakeholders, and they don't really know whether companies are kind of cherry picking what kind of metrics they are reporting on to just highlight the ones that make them sound good, right? And that doesn't really help shareholders as well, because shareholders want to know really honest accounting of those long-term risks and also opportunities, and where we might be undervaluing certain opportunities because we're not looking at the whole picture.
Thank you so much. And Patrick, I wanna continue something that Jen was saying, which was mentioning the on-farm work that you're doing with producers. And I know that you mentioned that you also have a background in soil health, and so specifically, I'd like to hear what your perspective is when it comes to outcomes-based versus practice-based on the farm when it comes to sustainability and producing food in a more responsible way.
I think Jen's made many important points. I'll try to make it very practical because it's useful if you are actually producing something. So I'm an organic cheese maker, and I mentioned my cheese is expensive. It costs around £15 a kilo ex-dairy, and you could go into a supermarket in London today and buy cheese at retail, which is probably half that price. Kind of what you might call supermarket cheese from industrial dairy farming. And so the question is, how can you get that information through to the consumer in a way which they will understand and relate to? And I think that true cost accounting is a very important part of that. But first of all, you have to measure the impact. So first measure, then monetize, and then communicate the whole picture. And as Jen has just indicated, there's a lot of mistrust about some of the existing labeling schemes and audits on ESG, for instance. And I think the reason for that is it doesn't go right back to the ground and the individual farm. So about 7 or 8 years ago, we set up a farmers and land managers working group. And our aim was to try to make sure that we had an auditing scheme for farmers all over the world using a common language, which enabled us to measure our sustainability using a harmonized framework of categories and metrics. And this common language could then find expression in labels. So imagine I'm selling my organic cheese. It's got a great story, but how can a discerning consumer know that we really are delivering positive externalities, social, climate, and nature? I think the answer is if we had a sustainability score which went alongside the organic label, which was based on my on-farm audit, which I do every year, so I can see for myself whether my soil carbon's going up, whether my nature's improving, whether I'm employing more people, which are, after all, a positive, a social benefit, or we're doing lots of education, or we're looking after our cows well. To Jen's point about the intangibles, I think we do have to somehow capture the value of, animal welfare and of beautiful flower meadows and all that kind of thing. I think we can do this. It's not a perfect science. It's a bit of an art and science hybrid. But if we can get that right, then we can have a sustainability score on the label. So I might be competing in the marketplace with someone else's cheese. It might be organic as well. I was with an organic cheesemaker last night, talking at a session with the Oxford colleges who want to source more sustainable local food. And my score might be 65, and maybe my competitor's score will be 64 or 67. And that way you can see not only whether you like the cheese, but also how well it scores. So if we could find the investment community and the food companies and retailers to all contribute to closing the gap between the apparently expensive, but actually more honestly priced food that sustainable farmers are producing, and the dishonestly priced food, which is creating a better business case for farmers who cause damage than farmers who deliver positive impacts. That's what we need to do, because price does rule in the marketplace. And at the moment, we're on an unlevel playing field, or to use a very inappropriate metaphor, where we've got an economic headwind in aeroplane terms. And we have a lot to overcome before we can compete on a level playing field with people who are producing food in damaging ways. We must close this gap. And I believe that the global community who are looking at this true cost accounting issue and developing these common disciplines and frameworks for measuring sustainability impacts and then monetizing them holds the future to unleashing a global agricultural transition, which is what we need in the next 10 years if we're going to avoid irreversible climate change, loss of nature, and damage to public health.
Very well said. And I'm, of course, thrilled to hear you talk about this idea of a sustainability score, because of here at How Good, we do have a How Good impact score, which does roll all of those different metrics into one score. And I think that it's this type of combination of data and storytelling that's so needed, especially when you're trying to communicate to the consumer on a label, as you say, that this is not just a stamp. This tells a story of all of the work and care and ethical and ethical consideration that's gone into producing this. And so we've talked a little bit about that consumer side, right? Like getting consumers excited about products and getting the power of the consumer market behind more sustainable products. I'd like to ask, in your opinion, how can the information, this data that's generated through true cost accounting, then be used to develop policy and economic interventions that promote sustainable and responsible food production and consumption? Because again, if we're looking at more upstream, these are the kind of interventions that can make a big difference. And I think, as you said before, the carrot and the stick. Is there anything that comes to mind right away? In terms of how that might be done?
Well, I think, it's important to also note that true cost accounting is not the end. It is a means to an end. And so you're right that in order to be able to create that ultimate vision of a food system that is more sustainable, healthy, and equitable, it requires some, probably from a lot of different sectors, interventions that then respond to what you learn through a true cost accounting analysis. So from the policy side, creating an enabling environment so that farmers and food companies who are trying to do this more values-driven approach to food production and to getting food to consumers are not at an unfair disadvantage, that they are actually the ones receiving the incentives and receiving the rewards for the practices that they're embracing. And then, similarly from a business side, needing to find the ways to encourage and incentivize business practices that are more sustainable. I think, we also, looking at the consumer side, consumers, by and large, there are large segments of consumers who will look for the information behind products and make their choices accordingly. But I think we need to get to a place where through incentives, through policy, through how changing, whether that's subsidies and tax schemes and research money and, all of the things that go into propping up and supporting the system that we've built, we need to figure out how to move those in a different direction, because the last thing we want to do is to make a system where only a certain amount of consumers can afford the food that is produced more sustainably and will be more nutritious for them and will pay farmers a living wage. That, we need to get to a place where the sustainable, healthy choice is the more accessible choice. And so that is all needing to be done through policies, and that, kind of filters through a lot of the initiatives that we and some of our partners are engaged in, with looking at how do we encourage both national policy, global policies, local and regional policies, working with a number of stakeholders. This needs to be an all of the above approach, where we're kind of putting everything we can towards enabling this transition.
I think Jenn is absolutely right. And I think one good way to start with that would be to require, say with the US Farm Bill, which is a lot of it goes through crop insurance, which is a very interesting mechanism if you think about it. So, corn farmers who are planting crops are insured against failure, planting or harvesting. And the USDA pays out, the government pays out if there's a failure. Now, you could use that same insurance mechanism to hedge against transition costs. So that would be a very interesting redesign of the Farm Bill. And so the way to achieve that would be for governments, whether it's the USDA or for our DEFRA in the UK, to say that if you want to get any support from the government, taxpayers' money in the future, you have to have an annual sustainability audit, which tells you and the government about your soil health, your biodiversity, your social impacts, and say using a framework based on the global farm metric, in other words, an internationally harmonized framework for sustainability assessment. Now, based on that, initially you would collect baseline data, and there are very few farmers in the US or in the UK who, if they knew that they wouldn't get any of this money unless they signed up for an audit, they would go for it, because where it's money, we all jump, where we just respond, and that's obvious. So after a few years, we'd have enough data to say, right, we will reward better outcomes. We will reward farming practices which deliver better soil health outcomes, better biodiversity outcomes. And I think that's an exciting mechanism, because then you could make sure that with the carrots and the sticks, the farmers who are delivering the public goods got the benefits through not just the Farm Bill, or in our case, the DEFRA, which is our Ministry of Food, Farming and Rural Affairs, but also it would give the insurance companies, the banks and the food companies good data upon which they could base rewards to the farmers. And imagine it's, at the moment, if you're an intensive corn grower, you make $1,000. And if you're a sustainable corn grower, you only make $500. Let's say the gap is $500. How can a coalition of banks, investors, insurance companies, food companies and others co-finance that gap, so that in the end, a transition to regen farming becomes a no-brainer, and the consumer helps by paying for food products which are part of the solution, not part of the problem. I think this is so exciting. Let's do it.
Hear, hear. I think you guys have both touched on the importance of both environmental and social impact assessment. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you are assessing and trying to improve the social aspects of what we think of as sustainability. I think so often when we hear the term sustainability, particularly in the private sector, it has to do with more of the environmental impacts, which of course are important. But as we move forward, we want to be able to bring our farming communities. We want to bring along, as you said, Jen, people who otherwise even now may not be able to afford the more quote unquote sustainable option. And so how is the framework of true cost accounting sort of tackling that side of things and thinking about that side of the sustainability equation?
Sure. Well, I will give a broad answer and maybe a couple of examples. But again, the frameworks that have been developed through a number of stakeholders. I noticed that somebody from True Price is commented in the chat. So True Price has a framework for assessing across a number of indicators. There's the TEEB Agri-Food framework, which desperately needs a rebrand of a better, catchier name, but is the sort of international gold standard for doing a true cost accounting framework at sort of at across a number of scales. But they all have, and then of course the global farm metric and the on-field assessment that Patrick and his team have developed. So they all have a way of looking at social and sort of human. Those two pillars are pretty interrelated indicators. Everything from looking at living wages, looking at farmer health and well-being, looking at the consumer, and if you're it all is the determination of which indicators you look at in a TCA assessment is really driven by what question you're trying to answer and what's material to your particular product, or what it is that your business or whatever it is that you're assessing. So it would vary from one TCA assessment to the next which exact indicators you might be looking at. So there are, you can look through and find those indicators, and I think farmer livelihoods and farm worker and food chain worker well-being and health indicators are really important components of that, and as well as community indicators, like what is the there's actually going to be a really great new TCA study coming out of India in a couple of months that really did a very thorough assessment of community wellness indicators based on a true cost accounting assessment of 4 different farming systems. So there are those broad ways. I think if you start to look at the current landscape and the impact that has been wrought by the current food system and the policies and decisions that have created that food system, you can pretty readily see that we're not doing very well on social and human indicators. If you look at rates of obesity and diet-related disease that continue to go up, somebody in the chat mentioned highly processed foods, and what is the role that the sort of shift in our diet over the last 100 years has really wrought on our health and our long-term well-being. You can drive into any community. I spent a number of years working on U.S. agricultural issues, and you can drive into a community and find these small towns just fairly decimated, with local businesses have been lost as increased consolidation and concentration in agriculture has occurred, and that was deliberately incentivized through policy at the U.S. and at the global level. So I think there are a number of indicators you can look at, but I agree, when we talk about sustainability, we're talking about the sustainability of the food system. We're talking about our sustainability, our wellness, our well-being, and the land and nature and us. It's all of a piece. So when you do an assessment that doesn't look holistically across all of those to make a decision and understand your trade-offs, you're likely to end up with a perpetuation of the current system or some new unintended consequences.
Absolutely. And I think it's well said that it's just transferring the cost. And that if you are, choosing to ignore it in one piece of our society, one piece of our food system, it will bubble up somewhere else. Patrick, do you have anything that you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think Jen's 100% right. And I think that measuring the social and human impacts of farming and food systems, including the nutritional impact, the point about the highly processed food is absolutely right. So we need metrics for that as well, is really important. And we've done some work with our global farm metric on that. So just looking at my farm, you need algorithms for all this in a way, but you need to say that, you need to look at the number of jobs, the quality of the employment, the skills, the number of visits to the farm, and they form different levels. I mean, do you have school visits? Do you train other farmers? Do you have an education platform on your farm, and do you engage with people? Do people walk the farm? All these are positive social and human contributions towards sustainability and health of society as a whole. And if we can capture these data, again, using a common format, this is really exciting, because I think, as you said, the social and human impacts of farming systems have been rather left behind, because we've put so much emphasis on climate and nature. And that must be brought up to a level playing field, so that society as a whole has as much information about the social and human impacts of the farming system as they do about the environment and nature, the climate and nature impacts. Because after all, in our hidden costs of UK food study, half the negative externalities were associated with damage to public health. And as we all know now, health insurance, or in our case, the National Health Service, which would be better named the National Disease Treatment Service, is threatening to bankrupt our government. So if we could invest in a more sustainable and health promoting agriculture and measure those impacts, this would all be part of the solution.
Thank you so much. We only have about a minute left. This has gone so quickly. Thank you very much for such great conversation. I want to give everyone on the call the opportunity to know how to get started. What would the first step be if you're a brand or an organization who's interested in true cost accounting, but you're not really sure where to start?
Do contact us, and information about the hidden costs of UK food. Get involved. And if you're a farmer, measure your sustainability. We're all in this together. We're all in this together. We need to collaborate as never before.
Thank you so much, Patrick. And Jenn, how can someone get involved from your perspective?
You can go to our website at tcaaccelerator.org. We are on Twitter and LinkedIn with the same name. And if you want to email me, my email address is jen@tcaaccelerator.org. As I said, we represent a pretty broad network of organizations. We kind of are the hub and try to be the connector between them, but we can connect. As I said, we have a number of groups that we work with who focus pretty heavily on the business sector. There are resources available like the TCA Agri-Food Handbook that TMG put out recently. There's the Capitals Coalition is working on a TEEB Agri-Food for Business guidelines that will be finalized, but there's a draft version on their website. So we can connect you with a number of resources if you should take this from being interested in this topic to actually wanting to implement it and work with people who have done this to be able to share your findings and learn along with the rest of the community and help us continue to develop and refine these approaches.